Greetings, fellow Ambazonians. This is Chairman Capo Daniel. Today, as promised, we want to give you, from the People's Right Advocative Platform, a comprehensive review of the big report that was recently submitted to the international community. Most countries in the United Nations, they see result from such research work as the window for which they judge conflicts, in particularly in Africa. So this report is the third of its kind that have mentioned Ambazonia, or our conflict in West Cameroon, because for us in the People's Right Advocative Platform, we are grounded on reality. So we will call our territory West Cameroon. That is the official name of our territory, West Cameroon. It is the Anglophone region of Cameroon. It is what we, from the former British Southern Cameroon, we aspire through our right of self-determination to call it Ambazonia. So just to make that one clear to everybody. So ladies and gentlemen, we have to understand that the fight for Ambazonia, the fight for our people's right, the fight for our right of self-determination is not done only on social media. It requires hard work, something that most of the Ambazonian leaders in the diasporas do not have. They don't have the time, they don't have the dedication, they are not able to make the sacrifices. Sometimes they lack even the intelligence to engage in this struggle. So I'm going to play video footages from the webinar, which was a release of the official research work of four major research groups that are specialized in research work in Africa. They are based on data. These are the groups that inform the world that the Cameroon was using illegal means to suppress our Anglophone uprising. This is the type of research work that legitimizes our struggle initially for the world to recognize that this conflict is real, and it is through their data that the United Nations decided to declare a humanitarian crisis that unleashed the whole UN to come to ground zero for the Human Rights Watch, for the World Food Program, the UNDP, all of these agencies to come on the ground. So as our people, they lost sight of this reality. This is very important. We have been consistent in pushing for to our people, the international institutions, and thinking about what is happening back home, but they have been distracted with the arrest of Ayabacho. It is now very real to our people what we have been saying all along. Sometime I remember when I said that Ayabacho was going to be arrested, because I was tipped up about the investigation that surrounds him and the crimes of the ADF, especially after the shocking public execution, which Lucas Asu called something summary execution, and he put the ADF egg of sea leadership on top of those decision making in carrying out those executions. I reach out to them because I still have friends there, and I tell them, you have a responsibility to denounce what happened, to apologize, and make sure that these are not conduct that you people are promoting. But of course, the rest is history. So my name is Capo Daniel. Wherever you're watching me, I'm the chairman of PRAP, and you receive greetings from my entire team and our executive and our network on Ground Zero. So today we will show now video. I will be speaking in Pidgin because our primary target of our communication is our people themselves back in Ground Zero. So I'm going to talk for Pidgin. We want to show now research work where researcher they don't do am. Four research group them, they don't come partner together for release this research work. They will release them through a webinar. The Secretary General of PRAP was participating in that webinar. For fight for Ambazonia, now they can't fight the whole the fighter, because you must know all the things the way they happen. Try for go for they go defend Ambazonia, for talk our own side of the story, and make sure say the conclusion they make it reflect we. So we don't struggle right later for the people them. We don't try to explain our side for them, and the result come the way it be. So I will present one now the research work where it done come out about Ambazonia, and the main thing we then report now and say the legitimacy for the fighting in no day again. The legitimacy for fight in no day again, and it be in line with the conclusion where the internal data then for PRAP is show now either will be declare cessation of hostility, and we run talk for Ambazonia fighter and say preserve your life now because if we engage in this peaceful way, peace by peaceful manner, we no go ever gain back that legitimacy for fight. If we stop fight, we struggle for get negotiated solution. If Cameroon e reject am after we would not show say we be ready for negotiate, we be ready for make some concession, then e go rekindle that international support, absent of which the fighting has lost its mojo. So make we play the video. I go play the research work and then I go dey talk when the video go dey go on, so that I go dey explain for una wetin wey dey happen for there. I go talk am all the presentation na for pidgin, because this one will be very important for our people dem for know wetin wey e dey happen and for also understand. Unfortunately, the one no be live show wey people dem fit receive question and answer, but my line dey always be open. My secretary general and members of our organization dey be open for always answer questions dem. So make we go straight for the video.
Today we are launching the third report in a joint series of publications between ACLED and GI Talk, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. This series is focused on non-state armed groups and illicit economies in West Africa. This publication that we're launching today focuses on the activity of Anglophone separatists in...
So the one of the presenter wey dey talk am. Dem talk say this thing dey focus on non-state armed groups. That means say Ambazonia war fighter dem na non-state. That means we no dey be a recognized country yet, and then war fighter dey consider we a non-state armed group. Na say they always call we. So if una dey hear they talk am, make una know say they refer na for we. Make we hear.
Cameroon.
Timothy. Hello everyone.
So I don edit am because of time. Na a very long presentation. So our media team that don concord the important part dem wey we want make una hear. And the one na one of the people dem wey dem participate for the research work for Ground Zero. Una see dem too go can talk their own part for the research work wey dem do am, their own conclusion dem. So the one na professional researcher dem. That means say pikin dem wey dem study for school for learn thing dem, for write data. Data means say for writing dem how e dey happen. Every day they write note, they dey follow investigate, look wetin wey dey happen, they go report am. So make una hear wetin wey dem talk am. E be very important.
State armed groups and illicit economies in West Africa. This publication that we're launching today focuses on the activity of Anglophone separatists in Cameroon.
Timothy. Hello everyone. Once more, I am Aaron Amabo, a conflict incident monitor from Reach Out. As we are aware, we are facing a socio-political crisis turned armed insurgency that has been happening since 2016.
So now here it talks say in a part of the monitor team for that NGO. So people then the way they don't train them. Their job now for the monitor thing them, they report them. For go look thing, can't talk them, wait till it happen. Now people then for ground where then they for Ground Zero, this boy where they talk Amos. Now one of the monitor them for ground they report. Maybe some people where they give now their own opinion, they just talk now wait till it happen. That means then they reporter them. I want me gonna hear wait till it report them. Wait till the same way it happen for Ground Zero. The one at the reality way it happen, not be saying as some person opinion. Make una hear.
Kicked off, we can say actively on the 1st of October 2017 with the unilateral declaration of the independence of Ambazonia for the formerly British Southern Cameroons. And at the beginning of the crisis, there was a lot of euphoria from the local populations, which was manifested in the large number of people who carried out peaceful demonstrations in the major cities of the northwest and southwest regions. But as time passes, we have noticed a drop in the euphoria and the enthusiasm, which has also ultimately led to a drop in funding for these actors, who have resorted to other means to fund their activities. We noticed in May 2022, there was a protest in some villages, especially in Oku, against the separatist fighters, which used to be a stronghold of separatist support in the northwest regions, which is in stark contrast to what we saw on the 1st of October 2017, which reveals a drop in popularity of armed separatist groups, and which has also led to their drop in funding, and now they have to find alternative means of funding to fund their activities. We have abductions for ransom, which are very rampant. We have looting of property, and we have the sale of illicit fuel, and we have roadblocks where they extort road traffickers money to allow them to pass. And then we also have the liberation tax, which has also been a great source of pain and grief for civilian populations, because they issue a receipt after the tax is paid, and if you are caught without a receipt, you are in trouble. If the security forces catch you with a receipt, you are still in trouble, which means that either way, civilians end up suffering as a result of this. And the crisis too has caused other problems that were quite latent in our communities, especially with regards to farmers and grazers, because we know at the beginning of the crisis, the grazers who are predominantly from the Mbororo ethnic group weren't much in support of separatist fighters who then targeted their cattle and their livestock. So this forced the graziers to side with state security forces, which sometimes arms them to and uses them as community informants. And so this has emboldened them, and they carry out raids, raping and attacking civilians. So there were other latent issues within our communities that have been raised or that have been caused by the crisis. And right now we face multi-phase crisis where we don't just have non-state armed groups against security forces, but we have farmers against grazers, we have grazers against non-state armed groups, and vice versa. So, and now one of the biggest issues that has come up with regards to attributing responsibility has come with the fact that it is difficult to identify who is whom. Identifying actors has become extremely difficult because we have situations in which non-state armed groups dress in military attire and attack civilians. We have situations in which members of security forces disguised as members of non-state armed groups to extort and attack civilians. And we have situations in which common criminals have just taken the whole context, have taken advantage of the whole situation to make money for themselves. So sometimes in monitoring and documenting these incidents, it has become quite difficult because it is difficult to know who is whom and who is doing what where, who is responsible for what. That's one of the latest developments with regards to the crisis. And now civilians are torn, and some of the most affected groups are, you have humanitarian actors who have difficulties negotiating access into different locations because they can't identify whom they're negotiating their access with. So in general, that is the context in which we are working, and I am happy that ACLED and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime has taken their time out to map out separatist financing in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon. Thank you very much.
So I want forgive una wait to wait that reporter so that me una hear. So it is try to talk that a reporter where it monitor things na a trained monitor where he job na just for write down what did happen. According to your own report, he compare the euphoria. That means say happy people they be happy when this struggle start. He use a case for reference now for Oko. We talk say for Oko for 2017, population will be matched for Oko for talk say they stand with Ambazonia, it be over plenty. And he talks say the contrast it be now na say wetin for 2022 population for Oko they be rise for talk say they protest against Ambazonian soldier them. So he showed that one say na for sure say enthusiasm and euphoria for the struggle, it don't reduce. Then it talks say because of the reduce of that euphoria, it don't make Ambazonia then see support soldier them with money. So the soldier they don't turn down for different way for bikini find money. They work at kidnap people them. They sell thingy. They block road them for collect money. And then he talk about liberation tax. Say liberation tax na a big source where it cause pain and grief for our people. That means say people they cry, people they suffer because of this way they call and say liberation tax. We then put both Cameroon government and Ambazonia fighter them against our population because when you pay the liberation tax, you will get receipt. That receipt to Cameroon military, they will follow you up because of that receipt, they will catch you. So people they be very painful. As a result, now a big source of pain and grief. Then he also talk about the problem, say the struggle that make a problem the way be there for our society, communal problem in the round of a jail for come up for camp for up again. And he quote example, the one from Bororo them. And he also talks say because in Bororo they don't always they rely on Cameroon military for support for protect themselves. They then they arm them and then they use them for carry out they make and they be emboldened for carry out atrocity them. Then he talk about the unknown gunman, how it be difficult for identify who they do waiting because sometimes Ambazonia so that they wear Cameroon, they wear army their clothes. Sometimes army they disguise, let's say them being an amber, they go do something. So now the different now the challenges and this way they and he also talk about challenges them for access. That means a human right group them, NGO them, sometimes they struggle for no way they feel negotiate access for. And we don't experience that one for PRAP because most of the time this NGO they come for we negotiate access with all soldiers on the ground. So far so good. We never get any incident, we never resolve them. But if we say it always be good, like when they come for me, I always try for not only negotiate with the soldier them, but I always refer them also sometimes for the groups and where they oversee those soldiers for ground. So maybe we'll continue the report.
Those diaspora members who wanted to support the Anglophone cause, whichever way they may interpret that, and in one way or another, sending money and fundraising was one of the few ways that they felt able to engage in this. And one caveat that we should make here is that, at least according to some of our sources, many of the diaspora members who donated to the Anglophone cause did so because they wanted to support humanitarian or political efforts rather than militant ones. And reportedly, some people felt misled when they found out that some of their donations were being used to support armed groups. That said, there is also no doubt that some fundraising efforts were very clearly framed for being for the purpose of supporting separatist fighters. But the question for our purposes is, what kind of relationship did this fundraising create between the diaspora and the armed groups? Can we go to the next slide, please? And the one after that. Thank you. So when you are an armed group and you have few or no resources, you started life as a very localized, perhaps village level defense group, and then
so these things they will be very important, they always be boring. But the urge una say una take time, una listen all this report because it be very important. So the other presenter it focus on about the funding for soldier for ground zero and the relationship with that money where they give them, where Ambazonia the diaspora they give them for soldier them, how we then create a relationship between the diaspora communities and our fighter for ground zero. I see the talk he talk say the funding them they then create that relationship where the diaspora they send money for them. And then he also mentioned the fact say plenty people where they don't donate money for struggle. They no one for donate directly if me go for soldier them or for contribute fund them me go for soldier them. But their fund that they go in for soldier them. And he talk say but fundraising and the way they raise and particularly for buy weapon the way people they contribute. And some of the logic that would always talk say they always want to get a group where they raise fund for the use other means and but we will know how the fund that will be used. Anyway, maybe we'll continue for here a report.
You find yourself up against a very well-armed opponent, you don't say no to offers of money, even if those giving it want a degree of control in return. And indeed, a lot of this was phrased in terms of solidarity, and these relationships developed quite willingly. And that provision of money from the diaspora that was being transferred to some of these groups enabled individuals in the diaspora to carve out roles within the separatist conflict that looked something like leadership. So money was being passed through the political wings to the armed groups, and in doing so, organizations such as the Ambazonia Governing Council and the interim government were able to carve out a kind of coordination role for the armed groups on the ground. But there were also cases of individuals.
So anyway, we hear the last part. He talk about cases of individual. He talks because of this support from the diaspora, it make the diaspora groups and for diaspora abroad, they carve out some type of leadership rule. It's some type of looks like it means it not be absolute. We always talk say no group not really get that absolute control, but then get strong influence over the conduct and activity them for so that have gone with into the rangi and willingly. But way they always start now during that process for that transaction of money. It means that without those money way diaspora they get for those soldiers, then sometimes those soldiers they no go even submit for them. And we don't get and plenty so that they say one person will give you money. If we not give you money, we will support you now, we endorse our group. So some of those groups they be based, the relationship will be based now on financial support you get for them. If you not give the financial support, they no go support your diaspora organization. Now either way, we'll get a lot of battle for Ambazonia about fundraising. If one group want raise fund, the other group will start sabotaging because now already a means and a source of control. Not absolutely, of course, but it look like they call it look like leadership rule. So when I see diaspora group, they talk they get leadership for ground zero. They not already get that absolute leadership rule, but they get something similar to, and not the only group. Then they talk individual and to the way they give support, where they play those rules. And it be very important for remark say this relationship then develop as a result of money. Very few Ambazonian group them or leaders engage so that they submit them based on ideology. Very, very few. And Aram build one of those experience where Aram build up soldiers and recruit soldiers them. Very few of us don't do it from diaspora. I think me, Chia Martin for some part also we done stop him. I think Chris Bongam also be done do something like that. Very few of us in the diaspora will be done generate forces them for ground, train youths them on our own from diaspora. We know say some group then like AG of C, they will do 8, they will build soldier for ground 0, the IG also they will be soldier for ground 1 initially. But those were physical training camps where they start their camps, they boy and come out gold and so on, they remain for the group. But very few people they don't do what we would do and for succeed, for recruit soldiers through social media, provide them training, provide them with equipment for carry out self-defense, equipping them also with the right ideology for use those weapons responsibly. That's very important. So maybe we'll continue.
Taking it upon themselves to fund smaller groups, particularly if they had perhaps a local connection to them. So these there were also more disparate individuals who were able to acquire at least a degree of influence, if not control, over the armed groups. Still, it didn't take very long for Cameroonian security services to detect that these transfers were happening through regular money transfer services. Intelligence began following the people sent to pick up money at the transfer branches on behalf of the armed groups, and then began tracking down the people involved in the financing networks. And this led to a number of arrests, at least within Cameroon. And likewise, there were new regulations placed on the use of money transfer services. So this state-led crackdown was one important factor in reducing the flow of financial support from the diaspora to the armed groups. Could we please go to the next slide? That the diaspora leaders, if you like, were very far from the action, and they had never really been in a position to direct the day-to-day activities of these armed groups, and they didn't have a great deal of control or authority to be able to do so. The money that they provided gave them influence, but not control. And one of the major factors.
So that one are points where I talking several times for our people them, and a conclusion that one of the conclusion for PRAP. We talk say our diaspora groups them, they don't get control. They get na influence. So anybody talks say the control force of a ground zero, that man here no they correct. You get na influence, not control. The control of every unit for ground zero, it always there for the commander, the general, or you get that force them, or the grandpa for the group, na he control that group. Maybe some person for diaspora. And a conclusion that way we would make them as well. and do some of our weak links and that for be able for prosecute this war for a very effective way as a result of those things. And maybe we'll continue.
Fast-tracked the breakdown of that influence was kidnapped for ransom by the armed separatists. So you can see from this graph that there was already a small number of kidnap for ransom incidents cropping up in 2018. And that's increased every year since, particularly after 2020. And that increase reflects a vicious cycle. So kidnap for ransom was always one of the most damaging practices in terms of the armed group's legitimacy in the eyes of civilians. So as you can see from the quote on screen, the more that kidnap was used, the less willing diaspora supporters were to fund the armed group.
So when I hear what we then talk, say the kidnapping for ransom is start for 2018 and it gradually they increase. And it talks to the kidnapping for ransom now the most damaging activity for Ground Zero where it destroyed the legitimacy of the fighting. Now, one of the things that I always talk about Mark Barata now the most dangerous, the most destructive person for this struggle. Because now he be one of the activists and where he campaign for kidnapping for ransom, legitimize, support, justify, even say it is a good thing. So those are some of the I was talking are just due to intellectual immaturity for people that like that way they don't destroy the struggle. I don't know what a motive behind that, but I think so we don't play the video for people then for see way to way if we do them. Most of the time when our boy they will do these things if we for diaspora we are population they don't trust we will they will position if we talk for them. We'll all stand denounce and talk say this is not right. We'll work with that nice ethics. We'll not forget all this problem. And then fight the things with they create anti-kidnapping squad, do all sort of things, preach about them, talk about them, but you fight against a multitude of voices them way all of them they just be in tied up with legitimate anger because we really drive people the way they make those mistakes and say then we see the frustration with our inability to build the capacity to free ourselves and they saw the brutality of Cameroon and they wanted to do everything in their own power to free us. That's why I'm not saying it to condemn Mark Barata, but that is just a record of him in this struggle, what he has done to our people. And you can hear researchers saying that was the single most damaging activities to the legitimacy of the fighting in Ground Zero.
So as a result, the more reliant, the armed groups became more and more reliant on illicit activity for money, and that included kidnap for ransom, with quite a high number of kidnaps. Now, certainly there were also bandit groups, and you could call them semi-professional kidnappers who took advantage of this instability and used them as a cover for their own activities. And it's also true that there have been cases of diaspora leaders encouraging the kidnap of people that they saw as disloyal to the cause. So it would be wrong to present this as a purely as a problem that was purely local to Northwest and Southwest Cameroon. Nevertheless, kidnap was really important in the breakdown of trust between many of the separatist armed groups and the pro-separatist members of the diaspora. And so as kidnap just became more and more prevalent among separatist armed groups, you likewise would reach a state where there were more and more divisions within these armed groups between the more politically committed fighters and those who wanted to focus on making money from the fact that they were armed. And this was very important to the fragmentation of the groups and part of the reason why the sheer number of groups has increased so much.
So now here, they talk about people that they hold gun, they start to feel entitled for make money because they hold gun and they tend for kidnapping for ransom. And some people then they will support those kidnapping for ransom because they know we get power. They know we get groups and where they fulfill present themselves as personalities with authority. So for spoil other group their power for Ground Zero where they will provide funds, and then the other one the way they know if you provide funds. Now I believe that about Mark Barata and many of them where they will promote kidnapping for ransom. They know if you challenge A of C or the IG because they know we belong for anyone. The people then for those groups they will reject them. So for them to spoil those groups, now for start begin encourage boy and for ground zero, me they start begin use kidnapping for ransom for raise money so that those groups they know will get those power over them. So you try for spoil organization them simply because you know get the power where they get them, and you need to think about the impact where you get them for the overall struggle. So now this type of things the way that make them was struggle with and for where we did. Maybe we'll continue.
Can I pass to the so separatist groups demand tax or contributions. They might use lots of different words, or liberation tax from civilians in almost every aspect of their lives, and it's summed up quite nicely in the quote from this fighter. So you have tax on roadblocks, you have tax on road transport, you have tax on social events, you have tax on food crops, you also have taxes on service provisions, such as it is not directly provided by fighters, but generally taxed nevertheless. And when these taxes or these contributions are demanded, they're framed in a way as a measure of support for the war effort. As you can see here, he says this giving of money to us means that they identify with the cause. And this puts civilians in an extremely difficult position. If they aren't able to give it or they refuse to give it, there is a risk that they will be identified as someone who isn't supportive of the cause, potentially a collaborator or a traitor, someone who can come to be known as a blackleg. Being identified as this can have very violent and even deadly consequences for the.
So we see the talk now say was so that they start becoming the axe tax for everything. Funeral, wedding, whether now for use road, for no use road, they start becoming ask money for everything. And they start becoming linked, they access money in a way where they link them for support for the struggle. So if you know the gift, you never pay this money them or you need to pay money for them, they will consider you say you being a black leg where it means you need to support the struggle. And those are some of the abuse and that were around trying for fighting for this struggle, for the misuse of the word traitors and black leg, where people they need to pay money for soldier them, they go kidnap them, now them feed the soldier they feel say they go kidnap them for acts and say we need to support struggle. For make the allegation for person say you need to support struggle, now it means say you must pay money, otherwise they go consider you say you need it for the struggle, you need the focus for the effort, they want to simply get the money. This one are some of the things they would not fight them, and when I feel here where international community they talk them. Some people they feel say if so that they do something, we don't lie, we cover up them, we will go away with them. No, you need to work now so. The international community they know what way it happen, they monitor them, and we need to acknowledge them, and we need for address them rather than for try for cover up them. If you say go hell away.
Used. So while there might still be people who are genuine supporters of some of these armed groups and contribute freely, there will also be a huge majority who feel that they have no choice but to give out this money. There's a whole other range of ways that they levy taxes on a variety of products. One quite interesting example is that levying taxes on alcoholic drinks from the Brasserie du Cameroun company, which is a company whose goods have been technically banned by the separatist groups themselves. However, for a tax, they're willing to make exceptions for bar owners who want it. Like Aaron said, they play a huge role in taxing the supply of illicit fuel that's
So we see the researcher they talk now the same conclusion what we then bring up for can reverse that ban for brasseries. Then talk say brasseries they use them also for take money for people them. Even though it be technically banned, when you pay soldier them some money, some big amount of money, they go allow you to sell them. That one are the practice that way it go on for ground zero will be counterproductive. And when I see our records, say we don't always be on facts. We work on fact, will be well grounded on principles. Now, either way, PRAP will be decided to reverse the ban against brasseries because it was now being abused, it was now being used unjustly in our people, and it makes the enemy, it gave the enemy advantage. So I think Unafi hears those things are based on real statistics on the ground.
Coming over the Nigerian border. This is something that we discuss quite extensively in the report, and it's worth saying that given that there is next to no provision for illicit non-smuggled fuel in particularly in the Northwest region. That is,
I think this follows well.
When I hear them talk about the issue for fuel, I think so we don't always be on the forefront for educate our people them about how we money where they come in for use for finge, how we they go for struggle, how we they use them for influence forces, and how we then become now the major single factor way in the control force of ground zero. The people the way then they behind this finge now they control our force of ground zero as I talk for now. Nobody leader of a diaspora. The leader of a diaspora they don't use and navigate legitimacy. Around give una several examples around tell how they fool the soldier them. Na way they make am ADF go block Bangui road. Na they control that they tear these people them for diaspora waiting for do. When Ayawachoka announced they want to ban taxi color as we have been here, na through these people them way La Republic their intelligence they put information meaning gear for the soldier them meaning implement them. Where they know say those decisions in a wrong one the way go turn our population against them. Because the Cameroon government then get a political agenda, not be just a financial one. They will always play that smart way for win-win. We will hear this other researcher. I think now 5 researchers in there. So we will run and through. We will hear what we talk. It'll be very important.
From your point, kind of highlighting the kidnapping in this graph, we're seeing not only abductions but also physical violence, those attacks. And in more recent years, the use of sort of crude explosives, a lot of times in the form of IEDs. So as you can see on the left of the graph, around 2017 until 2019, civilian targeting was actually higher by state forces. And this sort of generated the legitimacy of a lot of separatist fighters as sort of defenders of civilian populations and a legitimate alternative.
So I'm going to hear the one because it be very important. The graph where you don't show them. For the first one for year, it is shown for 2016, 2017 where the war do start. When I see they talk about physical violence, this graph then represent a physical violence. Let me say when they attack people, then they shoot them with gun, then destroy their property or this type of things. Then for 2016, 2017. This color now the color where they show them for action the way the Cameroon government do them. All the killing them, all the attack against our civilian population, it will be done by the Cameroon army. And the researcher they talk say because of that, it will make our struggle, it will be legitimate. Now for they will get what legitimacy because a majority of the attack them it will be conducted against our civilians by the Cameroon military. So our civilians then get right of self-defense under international law. So during that initial stages and for this struggle, our fighting on ground zero, it will be a legitimate fight. Now, either way, most countries then for the war, they will sanction Cameroon. The American government then cut Cameroon from AGOA trade deal with the help of African country them. Then stop for train their be them for fight against Boko Haram when a very legitimate war where the world will be concerned about them. They will be able to do all those things because our struggle was legitimate. We had the right. That is why anybody will be fight against Cameroon that time, you know, be commit crime, you will fight against that government way they attack your people, then you will get right to do them. But maybe we'll continue to hear how things and change.
To the violence that many civilians were experiencing from the state from that time. However, in 2020, this changed, and we saw separatist militias targeting civilians at least in equal proportion to state forces, and this sort of aligns with what Nello was talking about, where we saw this rise in kidnapping. We saw more and more violence carried out by separatists themselves against civilian populations. And
so now see that graph. The first one of 2016, now only Cameroon government be the attack our people them. The second one way they for corner day, that blue one way you see and so now the Cameroon army, they will see kill our people them, attack our people them plenty. You see Ambazonia, our own attack is small. The third one we now for 2017, for 2018, you see the Cameroon government be the key many people and they attack people and their property. Ambazonia attack against our own people, they will be very small. Until you go now for 2020, when that other one for corner day, you see how it be equal. Now the attack against our civilian, the killing of our civilian and the destruction of their property, it be done now by Cameroon government and our own fighter them equally. So let's say the talk say thing that it change. We're gonna hear how they describe the graph as it go.
in turn diminishing their credibility to the diaspora, limiting the funding that the diaspora was willing to give. And then in the last few years,
So for 2020 and 22, because of all those attack them, support for the struggle it dropped. People they no still dey contribute again for the struggle as they dey hear the report the way they come for ground zero. Na certain that they change. As they dey stop for support, the soldier and too they dey even increase those activities because they dey turn now towards alternative means that will support them. Where the influence from those alternative means then be away from the political agenda for our struggle wey e mean say things dey only get worse na for worse as time dey go. Una see how they dey represent am. No one na data dem for ground, raw data.
seen really an exponential rise in separatist violence, where the violence against civilians that has been carried out by state forces has remained relatively consistent. It's been, just escalating rather rapidly by separatist fighters, especially as we see them fragment, competing for smaller and smaller territory and areas of influence. The civilians that we see affected most largely are those that are part of various labor groups, those that own businesses, that are involved in different industries or trade.
So if they talk about the group them for civilian wey they attack them over. But when I start system for 2021, a new color go add for day. When the color now for other groups them, they vigilante the way the DR the so-called DDR then start for create them. Where people the Lengalajera they enter for business, they start give them money immediately create vigilante, then open the DDR center. When I start see another group go add for day. And when I see the action the way they carry am for ground zero, including the Ngarabo massacre where they carry am with complicity from the Cameroon military. The one a group in Galajera Cesar be bring am for inside ground zero. I say it seems that evolve make una hear as it go.
And a lot of this is because the separatist fighters tend to use sort of ghost town or lockdown type tactics in order to limit any commercial activity going on in various cities, oftentimes also limiting things like education. But those that violate these ghost town tactics end up being targeted.
So you hear one of the things where it make and that violence against our own people them increase now the use of lockdown, where it destroy our own economy, destroy our own things them, and it motivate people them for turn for attack our own people them. And at the same thing, in that way that Chris Anu and Sako for that 2021, they will do them extensively, excessively, we really damage the credibility and legitimacy for our cause. Maybe we'll continue for here.
By separatist fighters. There's a number of other groups that we sort of a shift of the violence towards more rural areas. So separatist fighters seem to be moving their tactics and basing themselves in less populated areas. And I think this also feeds into this general argument that they've lost legitimacy amongst many civilians in the Anglophone region. That in the initial stages of the conflict, they were able to often base themselves within more populated areas with civilian support. Sometimes this led to reprisals by the state amongst separatist fighters themselves, but also civilian populations that were seen or perceived as supporting the separatists. However, as they've lost...
talk na say, as time dey go, as the atrocity dey happen, many of our soldiers then comot them for place and where population plenty for the like urban area then, like Kumba, like Mutengene, like Boya, like Bamenda. Many of them come out of those areas. And increasingly, as time they go, they start becoming focus their activity and out of town they create their bases and now out of place where population no they stay now very isolated because they start lost the credibility from the population and the popular support.
Legitimacy, they've had to move out of these areas. And there's also tactical advantages to this, that sometimes fighters are able to sort of utilize the forests and more mountainous terrain. They often have more crude weapons than the military. And so in order to gain advantage, tactical advantages, they can kind of utilize these more rural areas against military forces who are less familiar with that terrain. And yeah, so this is really something that we saw starting in 2021 and then continuing to the present. So next slide, please. The organizational structure of the separatist groups at this point is a bit challenging to speak to as a coherent whole. The groups are increasingly fragmenting and moving into more and more smaller groups. However, we do still have some larger groups, SOCODEF, for example, that retains a broader organizational structure. A lot of this coming from the competing diaspora political groups abroad, and sharing of resources and sometimes command to various generals. And in turn, those generals lead smaller groups of mission commanders, sometimes called subgenerals, who then in turn oversee multiple units of fighters. As
So that one
Zella
about the
mentioned
structure
before, we also have
of
examples where individual diaspora leaders will also have these connections, offering commands and funding to a specific separatist group, kind of bypassing the broader organizational structure that we see from the larger groups, but still maintaining this connection with diaspora leadership.
So it show how other people then the influence forces them. Not only the people the way then they force that are identify with their group, but they talk to other people then to then get influence over forces them. That's it, they explain them.
However, with the fragmentation, I think it's important to highlight that more and more groups are kind of they're no longer receiving funding or commands from the diaspora. They've localized leadership and are largely operating, with leadership on the ground. So I think that probably represents the majority of groups that we're seeing proliferate in the last few years.
So they talk now say most of the group them they don't start get leader them for ground zero. As I don't tell now, the leader they don't change, you get leader them for ground zero. Majority way they not even be known. And those are the things the way they come as an effect of what will happen. When the struggle be start, Paul Biya be try for cut off internet for protect the diaspora, because not only for diaspora if you get effective political leadership or if you push a political agenda. So the leadership shift to ground zero, it just be very bad for everybody, because they don't have the comfort to be in the diaspora and have the international discussions and outreach and connections that we can have. And they are far from they are in the battlefield, which means that they have the pressure of their own personal security and they cannot be effective. They cannot show their face outside. They are so limited that it is not good. That is why Paul Biya was trying to cut off the diaspora. So today, naturally, that cut has happened by our own internal dynamic, and the result is there for everybody to see.
Next slide, please. And initially, there seemed to be that effort, interest in running schools and providing public services, but from the interviews and fieldwork that was conducted for this research, what we saw was around 2019, much of this started falling apart. And Southwest region, as well as comparing this to the rest of Cameroon, we see this kind of escalation of the conflict, concerningly shifting towards more and more towards the northwest region of Cameroon. And this seems to be building so far in 2024, that the second quarter of 2024 was actually the most.
So then talk about the decline for fighting for Southwest area, which happened early on. I think that one maybe coincide with the county by county issue, where basically destroy the whole outlook of the struggle, push them for a whole Northwest issue. But eventually 2024 things then start balance up back as soon as they hear and say they talk them.
Violent of the conflict so far. So while we don't have annual data for this yet, what we can see is that conflict is escalating, and that the fragmentation of this conflict is increasing the levels of violence, but it's also weakening the bargaining position of the separatist movement, which I think makes peace negotiations more difficult. There's more groups with more competing interests, and so bringing those groups to the table will be quite challenging. As I think we have mentioned, these many of the peace negotiations so far have kind of tried to bring in much of the diaspora. And while I think that is still important, the localization of leadership within the separatist movement will likely require further engagement with local organizations, with these local leaders in order to make mediation possible, if that is.
So when we talk and I say, all negotiation process them, they don't try to bring people then together. But the fact that localized leadership that emerge, any negotiation will go be viable, go need to include those people then for ground. Now either on a say PRAP initiative for our vision for come up with a common position would I encourage vast majority of our leaders then for ground zero, the leader for the IDPs, the leaders for the refugees, the leadership within the soldiers for make sure say their voice and be heard, then be well delegated so that we will easily come to a consensual position to be able to have a proper and effective negotiated settlement. But it only is as good as our internal dynamic, and we must accept some of those realities. Some of those limitations will be there, and some of the effect will linger on with some level of violence even after we have a negotiated settlement, but without the legitimacy of the fighting that we have. And with increased more success, because without legitimacy you always it's a dead end for those people who will still be on that highway.
Possible. But as we want to highlight and can't reiterate enough, civilians are in a very vulnerable position, often targeted both by separatists as well as the state, and with frequent crackdowns even for suspected of collaboration on either side.
Can you hear me? I have a bit of sound problem.
It was the drop in popularity amongst the separatist movement, that initially we saw support from urban areas, from the educated parts of the Anglophone population, the teachers and judges, lawyers, especially, who were widely involved in the demonstration movement from the start. And the ability for separatists to live in more urban areas and in major towns. Of course, the military also had some tactical advantages to pushing them out over the course of kind of 2018, especially until 2020, when we started seeing the shift towards more rural areas. And that's when we started seeing violence move into these more rural, mountainous, forested areas. And along with the inability of separatists to kind of live among civilian populations as they once did, we also had military kind of having the upper hand tactically in those areas, and separatists then relocating to more rural areas for those reasons. So I think that's really what we explore in the report.
So if you look at the top, you go for place like for inside Boyo, might talk about my own home division for inside Boyo. Place and where Cameroon military no be fit stay for day for inside Fundong Bello, where for 2016 to 2019, basically all of their presence they disappear. Even for inside Boy and other states, they be true for all of them. They start begin come back when kidnapping for ransom that increase. Those attacks for our population they increase. Those populated areas, the Cameroon military start begin get more success, because not only did our people start to feel comfortable with the Cameroon military due to the attacks against our own people, because the Cameroon military at least have some chain of command and things like that. It is just reflective of the reality, and this is not to throw blame around, but this is meant to give our people the full picture that researchers have put together. And these are the things that inform the international community about what is happening, regardless of your opinion.
But I think that's the main driver of the shift from urban to rural.
Yeah, Manu's absolutely right. There were diaspora members who were extremely involved in the planning of operations, and we've even heard rumors that they were involved in gathering intelligence through various ways, and then passing them on to fighters, and to some degree involved in coordination as well. The point I was trying to make more.
So it also talk about this exceptional role way the diaspora they don't play also don't play for being able to gather intelligence, pass on for soldiers, coordinate activities, push the political agenda. Now, it will always be more important for give them a sense of direction if we need to focus our attention, for stop some international events, for make a public statement, and a very important role that we would play for diaspora.
Is that I think it became very difficult for the diaspora leadership to set boundaries and set rules that were obeyed on by the fighters on a regular basis, and that those fighters also had the ability to ignore those commands when it became to ignore diaspora influence when it became less convenient for them, and as there was less and less financial support coming out of the diaspora, there was less and less incentive for them to obey the preferences of diaspora leaders. I hope
primarily against the Cameroonian military forces. We don't see a lot of contestation against separatists, nor do we see a lot of clear collaboration during clashes against the military. Whether or not there's further collaboration kind of outside of that, whether they're trading, in terms of resources or communication, that part is a bit unclear or falls outside of ACLED's purview. But
the sale of marijuana, which is quite rampant in communities, especially in the Bui division, because it was a commonly grown drug in that part of the country, and separatist fighters have kind of taken over the production. And with regards to women, I think this is one thing I witnessed myself in Oku, where the women actually grow the cannabis inside cassava farms, because the cannabis leaves are very similar to cassava leaves, and so it kind of helps dissimulate them. I witnessed this when I was abducted in 2022 by separatist fighters. So their wives play some of them, they are married, and their wives play a good role in growing the cannabis plants that they intend sell and raise money.
in at least the interests of armed groups becoming more and more localized, I think there's less and less kind of at least espoused interest in kind of creating an entire separate country by most of these groups. They're more contesting like a small territory, a small area. So kind of this turning towards the local from like broader territorial interests, I think is certainly something that we've seen. Kind of part of this is the growth of other forms of actors. I saw a couple of questions related to this, and that's that we've seen growth of other kind of community self-defense groups that are also kind of taking up arms to defend themselves, whether that's against separatists or against other perceived threats from the state or other groups. We mentioned in the report the growth of various forms of ethnic groups. I think Aaron actually touched on this, the arming of various Mbaroro, and the threats that is also posed to civilian populations. So with that, I think there's kind of competing interests all kind of playing out that's fragmented this conflict. And so a rising number of disparate armed groups that are sometimes working together. But I think one thing that we can share from sort of the ACLED insight is that there's more and more contestation both within separatist groups themselves, but also kind of competing separatist groups. So we're picking up on rising levels of violence between separatists instead of just separatists against the military or police forces. So those are some of the ways in which that fragmentation is happening and turning from kind of national level interests of a separate state to just kind of competing over smaller territories.
Thank you for those insights there, Lad. And I think that's probably quite a good way to end this discussion, looking at how we kind of see this conflict evolving into the future as we see greater levels of fragmentation. Unfortunately, we were not able to get to all the questions that we had there. We will try our best to get back to everyone who did submit questions. But otherwise, thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to our panelists, Lad, Nella, Aaron.
So, fellow Ambazonians, Unaran here basically the report from ACLED, where they partner up with 3 other researcher groups and for make them about our territory. Then talk say most of the fighting now na competition amongst our own various groups to control local areas. Therefore, the focus on a global Ambazonian territory presented in the fighting on ground zero do not exist. Every group that's fight focus on their fight for a very small localized area. They also have made a case that the legitimacy of the struggle have gone, as you have seen in that graph, that the fighting against our civilian, the attack against our civilian cannot make researchers to justify that this fight is legitimate, that this fight represents our interests of our people, because the fighters are attacking our people even more than the Cameroon military. The data have said it. If you want to debate, you want to make your own issue, you can build your own war, but eventually reality catch up with us, like we have seen in the case of Ayabacho. We must be based on facts and statistics and principle, not creating a war of our own, and that is the problem we have in our struggle today. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is why the People's Right Advocative Platform, we have declared cessation of hostility, because we cannot continue to support fighting when the vast majority, more of the fight, is perpetrated by our own fighters against our own population. That means that the fighting have lost its legitimacy. You have seen it now from white people. I think you people believe what we had concluded almost 1 year, 8 months ago. So it is time for us to stop the fighting, to retreat, put our gun in our chest, and use other means, because fighting now is not legitimate, it's not viable. That is why you have seen that for the past 8 years, the Cameroon have tried everything to arrest Ambazonian activists. They could not, because we are fighting a legitimate fight. And those who are engaged in fighting now are tying themselves to war crimes, actions that will become even more and more deadlier to our people. And the actors that are going to be motivating those type of activity are usually Cameroon military agents that have infiltrated the system as a result of the pay, the influence of money that comes in from petrol and other illicit activities that our soldiers have adopted to use in order for them to survive. Surviving by kidnapping for ransom and all those things is something that we should not encourage. We should never get involved, and our people have to, genuine soldiers who are fighting for this struggle. We have struggled so much through our diplomatic means to push for arrangement where we can have that cessation of hostility, remove soldiers from the battlefield, and work on a proposal that will have a future for our soldiers in our police force, in our fire brigade, and also to have a return program for our refugees to come back. But it's time for us to stop the fighting. It's time for us to engage in concrete, meaningful negotiation with the central government of Cameroon to solve this problem through the peaceful means. I've heard a lot of rumors that now many Ambazonian organizations who initially thought that we were being betrayer of the fighting by taking these positions, now they themselves are coming around to this position. But like we always say, it takes our people 2 years to come to the same conclusion that we have seen it. Wisdom is to be able to see things far before they happen. The talk say, wait where old man fish down for ground, he see him. Young man, even if he stand up, he know see him. He show and say, for be able to get a foresight and a wise thing, and you go want to rely on people to let them be wise for their counsel on how we move forward with very important things like this. So thank you very much to have patience to go through these things. We stay focused. We are working very, very hard to make sure that we don't lose the war and lose the peace, that we at least win the peace for our people and giving them something that they will know that all the sacrifices in blood and treasure is worth it. We owe that to our people, and we are dedicated and committed to go through with it. We have secured international partners. We have put up a robust position in the peace plan paper, and we are engaged with other Ambazonian factions, influential people, personalities, to make sure that we have a common position to be able to make that offer. We will continue to walk in this light. God bless you. Keep us in your prayer and pray for just peace to return to our homeland. God bless you.